This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with documentary filmmaker Shona Main, and she talks to us about the ethics of filmmaking, beginner's mind, and meeting Seamus Heaney. Enjoy this episode. Hey, it's James Taylor, and welcome to the show. And I'm delighted today to have my good friend Shona Main as my guest. Shona Main is a modern Renaissance woman. She probably wouldn't like me saying this of her, but this is how I think of her. With a background in journalism, law, politics, and social policy, Shona spent years as a travel writer and columnist before picking up a film camera in 2011. Her first documentary, Clayville, is an intimate portrait of a crofter on the Scottish island of Shetland. While in Shetland, she began researching the pioneering documentary filmmaker Jenny Gilbertson, who had filmed crofters on the islands in the 1930s and the Inuit of Arctic Canada in the 1970s. Recently, Shona has embarked on a practice-led PhD, which explores the ethics of Gilbertson's filmmaking and her own. And in 2018, she's going to be heading to the Arctic herself as part of the research and filming for this project. It's my great pleasure to have Shona with me today. So welcome, Shona.
Hi, James.
So first of all, share with our listeners, what's going on in your world just now?
Well, I've just come back from 3 weeks in Shetland, doing some reading and some thinking and some writing. It's a kind of wild time of the year to be in Shetland, lots of wind stirring things up inside me and outside. But I really like this time of year up there. So that was a really productive time. I've come back. I'm now in Glasgow for a few days, working at the National Library of Scotland Moving Image Archive, which holds Jenny Gilbertson's diaries and specifically her Arctic diaries. So I have been in the Arctic with her today, in Greasefjord, as she's been out hunting with Larry. They've been out hunting seals and belugas, and she's just been describing her experience of being in that settlement.
Wonderful. Before we kind of go into talking about Jenny Gilbertson and her fascinating story and what kind of attracted you to doing your PhD around the work that she did, take us back a little bit, because obviously you've had this background in journalism and politics and social policy as well. So you came to picking up the camera relatively late in life. What was it that made you pick up that camera that first time? Was there something that you wanted specifically to say when you picked up the film camera in 2011?
Well, I was in my 40s by the time I picked up a camera, and I'd spent a lot of my life trying to do things which I thought might change the world. In all honesty, I don't think I ever did change the world, but I kind of just almost felt as if there was, especially in my writing, there was a kind of need to find connections, to connect with people, to give people voices, to examine some of the humanity that's in the world, and to maybe see if that could communicate with other people's humanity. So that's really, I think film is very, very powerful, and I just thought I would really like to turn the camera on people and kind of look at them and maybe allow them to express and to show their world and the way they look at the world.
So because you've had that other background in almost shaping the story, you're shaping it, or let's say when other people have been trying to shape a story and you've been having to get to the truth of what the story is, whether that's in journalism or law, for example, does that influence your approach to yourself as a filmmaker when you see so many things on TV today and in movies where you think there's been some liberties taken maybe in the editing room about how the person that this program or this documentary is about, it's definitely taking a particular angle on that person's life. So when it comes to you in terms of how strident are you about kind of pushing your own message in your filmmaking, and how much do you want to let the actual story and the characters themselves express what their message is?
Well, I'm actually really nervous of having a message because I think what I'm I don't want to do is go in there with a story and just make the images and the words fit into my story. I think this is probably what I've always had to try and do in my previous lives, is always try and work around the narrative, whereas actually I actually want to hear what people's stories actually are and allow them to be expressed rather than me coming in there. And I think that's quite often what can happen in documentary, is people have an idea about what they want the story to be, and they're not open enough to allow the story to develop within filming and within editing.
And coming to filmmaking kind of later in life, you obviously as well, you're having not just the ideas that you're wanting and the conceptually what you want to do, but you're also having to learn the craft of filmmaking. And it seems to be it's such a huge area, in terms of, obviously, from the visual side, there's the audio side, there seems to be so many different components. But where do you start when you pick up that first camera? Where do you kind of go to kind of learn your craft?
Well, I was very lucky. I mean, my training really was 3 days with two filmmakers, one of them who works in the BBC, the other one who works in education, Dario Sinforiani and Mike Higgins, and they were running this course. I'm a member of all the trade unions, all my trade unions, and the NUJ and BEC2, but NUJ were running. NUJ was a trade union I was in when I was a journalist, and they were running this course called Digital Convergence for kind of journalists who basically were out of work or were trying to find new work, because obviously the situation in print media is really difficult. So they were trying to assist journalists to do that. So I did this course. It was 3 days, and it was 3 days where I was really, really switched on. Something really happened when I was doing that course, and I was thinking, I can use this, I can do it. It was very basic in terms of how to use a camera, how to do basic editing. And I just went away and learned, I used to look up endless amounts of YouTube videos. I used to watch films. I mean, I've always watched films. I've always thought about the craft of filmmaking as a member of the audience, but I just became very, very serious about it and fascinated and kind of, I don't like the word obsessed, but I just became engrossed in it and really just learned just through watching, through thinking, through wondering, what are they doing? How can I do this?
And you mentioned this kind of looking at the filmmaking, if you're watching things on YouTube or you're watching documentaries and seeing the craft of how it's done. I'm interested that now that you kind of know how the levers are being pulled and some of the backstage to what's going on. Does that have an impact upon your enjoyment of the movie, where maybe before you were just able to just take in the story, and maybe today you're actually looking and think, well, that's interesting, the way that they've set that angle up, or the way that they've edited that particular piece?
I don't think it disturbs my enjoyment, because I've actually always had a critical eye over things. I've always thought that things weren't working, or wondered why something wasn't ringing true, or wondering why something was jarring with me. So I've kind of always, I think now I still have an awful lot to learn. I'm really very much still, I feel like I'm starting out still. So there's lots of things I need to understand, but I certainly feel as if I have at least the very beginnings of what I can work with to do the things that I want to do. So
it's almost like approaching it like a beginner's mind and going into
fresh.
Yeah,
I think actually I actually really like being a beginner. I think actually I really would like to be able to hold on to this idea of being a beginner. I actually think it makes you feel fresh. It makes you feel as if you don't know everything. It makes you feel really kind of alive to learning.
And in terms of the industry, coming into this industry as well, what's been the perception of other people in the industry that have maybe been working a lot longer? Are they very embracing of new talent coming in, or do they look at you a little bit suspiciously because you've had these different things that you've done and you've come to filmmaking now?
Well, I've met some people who have been incredibly encouraging, and really they're the ones that I remember. I don't tend to remember negative experience. Well, I do actually. That's not true. I do. I can think of a few frosty looks and a few questions asked. But I mean, in honesty, I'm not really looking for industry approval. I actually like the periphery. I want to be on the periphery. I don't really want to work in the industry in terms of, work on big budget stuff with big crews. I want to be on my own, doing my own thing, trying to kind of realise this vision that I have. So, it's interesting to engage with the industry in terms of meeting people and having conversations with them, but I'm not really chasing them, to be honest.
And
I think there's room for people like me. There has to be room for people like me, and there'll be other people who that's exactly what they want to do. They want to go right in there. They want to work for big films. They want to write films. They want to be involved in big productions. That's their thing, but it's just not mine.
Yeah. And then I mentioned at the top of the show, we were talking about Clayville, which I got the chance to see. And I'm trying to kind of put into words the kind of what that film, I think it was a very human story of a fascinating man as well, but it almost felt like the landscape had its own story going on as well as the individual in it. But we should probably describe the person that's talked about in you talk about in the documentary. He is a crofter. So for those people that outside of Scotland, outside of the UK, what actually is a crofter?
A crofter they're like a farmer, but they have a small holding which they rent. And they're basically subsistence farming. So you're kind of growing a small amount of food, or rearing a small amount of food. It's kind of small scale farming, and it's still kind of very popular in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland because people, you have to have another job. You can't just do that. You have to have some kind of income, but it's a way of life that's endured.
Someone once said to me the other day that he thinks the creative industries are becoming like the crofter economy, where everyone has to have, I suppose some people would call it the portfolio life, but he was, being a Scot, he said it's like a crofter, where you have these multiple income streams. So you would have the crofter who has some sheep, but also is the postman as well. How did Clayville come about? Because it's a fascinating story, and it's not a story the kind of story you often see on screen. So how did that relationship come about with that crofter?
Well, I grew up in that part of Shetland, Bigton, and when I was a child, we used to drive by Clayville either in my dad's car or in the school bus, and I just used to see him all the time. He was always there. You talked about the landscape. I actually think of him as part of the landscape. He was always there in his blue boiler suit and his little yellow wellies on the hill with his sheep. And so he's actually, when I left Shetland, he actually has continued to be always in the back of my mind in some way. There was something about him which was it kind of just felt reassuring just thinking about him. And I used to go back to Shetland and I used to see him, or more likely I would hear his voice before I saw him. He's got a very distinctive voice. And there was just one day when I heard him in the shop and I just thought, there's something, this is the moment. I mean, it's when I had started filming. I thought, this is the moment. If I'm going to do this, I don't have all the skills. I don't have all the expertise, the experience to be able to do it maybe fantastically well. But this is the moment where if I'm going to do it, I have to do it now, because he isn't going to last forever. And, people of that age, you just don't know. So I just seized the moment. I had a friend who knows him very well, who spoke to him to ask him if he might be interested in the idea of it. He was very interested in the idea of it because to him it was company. So I spent a year going backwards and forwards, spending a lot of time with him outside in his house, sitting in his car for hours talking. It was actually the year my father died. He died just at the very beginning of filming, but it was just actually think death. There's something transformative about death, and actually spending that year with James Robert when all that was happening to me, it was really a transformative experience.
And as the subject, what did you get a sense of? And when it was first kind of shown as well, and he saw it, did you get a sense from him what his feelings were about kind of seeing it reflected there up on a big screen as his life?
Well, he certainly sees it as his film. That's how he talks about it. He recognised himself in the film, which to me, that's, I didn't turn him into something that he wasn't. He recognised himself on film. He's actually not. He's not actually going to see his sheep anymore. He's pretty much confined to his home now. He has people coming in, helping him, and folk come and visit him. So he's got some contact with people, but he hasn't got that contact with Clayville anymore. But he does, sometimes watch the film, and he does have, he sits and thinks about Clayville all the time. And I think really that's what the film captured, is that holding of his love for his home.
And for people that are listening to this just now as well, who probably don't know where Shetland is in the world, this small,
it's in a box.
It's this tiny little box up in the middle of actually it's closer to Scandinavia than it is to Scotland, I believe, as well.
Yeah.
So for someone that's listening just now that's in San Francisco or if they're in Berlin, why should they be interested in learning about the life of a crofter from an island that they've maybe never heard of? What is it about his story, and what is it about the way that you tell it that you think is engaging?
I think the thing I like about his story, the thing I like about him, is just the way that he was the way he was happy within himself, in his place, and the way he was creating his own happiness in terms of just the very simple things that he did every day. There's nothing complicated about James Robert, but there's something very profound about him, and I think that's what I really wanted the film to kind of reveal, was that profundity of his life, and the real value of the way that he sees the world.
And in the process of making the film, I'm sure there was kind of highlights, and there was highs of doing that, and being able to see what was maybe in your head, or the way that you wanted something to be shown up there on screen, or you wanted that story kind of shown as well. But I'm also guessing, being your first documentary, that there were things where you maybe tried and they didn't work out like you'd hoped. Were there any examples of that where you tried something, it didn't work like you'd want, and more important, what were the lessons that you took away from that experience?
Well, I had ideas that I was going to film a sheep giving birth to a lamb, about that, things are going to happen, but actually I kind of very quick, and also he didn't really like speaking to the camera. He was very self-conscious about speaking to the camera. So quite a lot of the idea I had about him talking and telling a story, we had to change that. We had to just basically I would just sit with him, and we would just talk about life, talk about things that were happening in Bigton. He would tell me about his mum and his dad, and so I would just sit with the sound recorder on, sometimes in the car, sometimes outside on the side of the road, sometimes in his house at night. So the kind of the idea of actually how he was going to narrate his film had to change, because he didn't like talking to the camera. But actually, I kind of, within the first kind of few days, after being in the zone with him a few times, where I was just really not actually thinking or working out what was happening, I was just being with him, I kind of realised that just that was actually the thing that was of value, and that was where I was getting the things that I needed. It was just allowing it just to happen. So
it's a little bit like, I suppose there was, for years and years, the TV shows, or it seems to be that obviously the script writers, the whole point of writing a particular scene is to move the story forward. It's constantly to move the story forward and the narrative forward. And then you get things like Seinfeld, which are programs about nothing happening.
Yeah.
It seems like nothing's happening as well. And so I'm conscious for you as someone that's you have this kind of background in thinking about maybe stories, and you have this thinking about the way things are perceived and different perceptions and stuff as well. Was that quite a hard thing for you to kind of get to the point of actually just kind of going with it and going with the fact that there wasn't a strong narrative? He certainly wasn't going to give a strong narrative line. It might have to be something you did in the edit room. I'd
been in my early 20s, I think I would have been trying to force things or trying to make or wanting things to happen, regretting that things weren't happening. I think I would have I'm not sure I would have actually made this film in my early 20s, to be honest. I think the fact that it's happened at this time in my life where I'm very comfortable with slow things and with actually letting things gently unfurl rather than, I'm not really a speed freak. So I think it's because it happened at this time when I am who I am just now.
And the work you're doing now is around the documentary filmmaker Jenny Gilbertson. So she's like a fascinating woman, fascinating kind of filmmaker. Tell us a little bit, for people that don't know about Jenny Gilbertson, who was she, and why is her work so important?
Jenny Gilbertson was born at the very beginning of the 20th century. She was a daughter of a Glaswegian steel merchant. And she trained to be a teacher, but she really was struggling with the idea of conforming. So she went and did a secretarial course in London, which included a little bit of journalism. And she met somebody who had a camera, and she was watching some of their footage, and she just actually thought, I'd really love to make little films. And she was in her late 20s when she said, I'd really like to make little films and maybe show them, lecture on them in schools or whatever. And she just went and did it. She had a very, very small inheritance from an uncle, which allowed her independence. This is a woman in the 1920s, so it allowed her some independence. And with that, she went up to Shetland in 1931. She had actually been going there on her holidays, so she knew a crofting family. She went and she stayed with a couple who lived in Haler in Shetland, which is near Hillswick, and she just went and spent time with them. She just filmed them, walked around with them. There's a lovely gentle ease in her films of the Clarks. That's the couple that she filmed. So she had I really like that style. When you watch her films from the early 1930s, which is all mainly kind of crofting and a little bit about the rest of Shetland, they're all they're not really like the constructed documentaries that you'll maybe see from the kind of Griersonian documentaries. That's the John kind of Grierson style of documentary making, which was kind of happening in London. They were all very constructed. They were productions. They were kind of the way in which they looked at the participants of the film was very different to the way that she looked at them. She was very much at ease with them and fascinated by them. She wasn't trying to kind of tell a political story about them.
So the previous people, they had an idea of the story, the narrative they wanted to sell, and they exactly. Filmed based upon that. So one of the things that you're in the PhD you're doing just now is you're very much exploring the ethics of her as a filmmaker. Yeah. So we hear a lot today about ethics as it relates to news, and we have like fake news and things like that as well. Why is having an ethical dimension an important thing for a filmmaker to have? What role does ethics play in the life of a filmmaker?
Well, I'm kind of specifically looking at documentary film, and documentary film uses ordinary people. I think news generally will is there to kind of challenge the powerful, whereas documentary. Yes, there is documentary that challenges the powerful, but there's a lot of people in documentary, participants in documentary that are powerless. They're just ordinary people, but I think what I feel about documentary is that ordinary people, when they participate in a documentary, they bring a huge amount of value. They come up with the goods that the documentary maker then kind of composes and turns into some kind of narrative. And I just think there's a need to kind of honour them a little bit more and respect them and allow them to play a bit more of a part in the telling of whatever story they have.
And so it seems to be in recent years you've obviously fly on the wall style documentaries became really, really popular because they were cheap initially for broadcasters to kind of create those, and then another angle started coming in as well, maybe more recently, if it feels like, of sometimes called like the kind of poverty porn, I think is one of the expressions, where using that kind of fly on the wall feel, but having whether it's done in the edit room floor, very much wanting to portray people, the subjects as that as well. What do you think someone like Jenny Gilbertson would have made of the kind of documentary making that's happening today?
Well, I think she would have been thinking about the people that were in it. She would have been wondering about them, about how they felt about being portrayed that way, and what actually is missing from that picture. The thing is the way in which they're being portrayed. I think by being with somebody and spending time with them and allowing them, I think it's also about time. Quite often documentary makers, particularly those that work for the kind of big broadcasters, they don't have huge amounts of time to spend with their subjects. So there's a rush. I think what she did is she spent time with people, and that gave them the opportunity to be themselves, to feel more comfortable in front of the camera, and actually to offer that bit more themselves. And she then went on to honour that.
And I know you're not particularly a fan of the thought of the often thing that's talked about in creativity, the aha moment or light bulb moment, or but in the work that you've been doing, both with your kind of discovery of filmmaking, both with Clayville and then the work that you're doing now as well, have there been any kind of key insights, times where in the work that you're doing where you've maybe decided, okay, this is a direction I want to go with my work, or this is an area that I don't feel has been explored sufficiently that I really want to look at more?
I don't think I'm doing anything unique, to be honest. I think the thing is that I am who I am, and I'm just kind of, you get to a certain age where you actually feel as if you actually feel comfortable with who you are, and you actually see, you see that you've got something to offer. So I just think I'm just another person who is wanting to spend time with people, to be with them and to film that being with them. I don't think I'm unusual. I don't think I think there's other people that are doing this, but they're them and I'm me. So there will be a difference.
And you mentioned you had some, when you first getting into filmmaking, you had some people that kind of gave you advice kind of early on, especially around the technical side of things. What's some of the best advice that you've received so far about being a filmmaker, and actually maybe more broadly than that, doing kind of creative work?
I think the two people who have given me advice, actually there's lots of people who have given me advice, and people have given me encouragement, which actually, if there's anything you can give to anybody who is trying to do something, it's just to encourage them. But there's two kind of people who have inspired me to do things, and one of them is Jerry Rafferty, in his song, "If You Get It Wrong, You Get It Right Next Time." And when I was editing Clayville, I had a big problem with Clayville. We actually showed it for the first time at Screenplay, which is the film festival in Lerwick, and it was still in standard definition. It wasn't in perfect shape, but it was the premiere, but it was the best I could do at that moment. But afterwards, to get it into shape so I could confidently take it around places and show it to people, and actually it's quite difficult to push yourself forward, so you have to feel that you've got the best thing possible to push forward. So I had to spend months re-editing it. I had to invest in technology that was very expensive to be able to cope with this half-hour film that was enormous in terms of its file size. I had to kind of, and I struggled technologically to do that, but I just used to sit and listen to that. I used to play it on my other laptop while I was working on my big iMac. I used to play Jerry Rafferty. If you get it wrong, you get it right next time, over and over and over again. And that kind of, every time I hear that groove, I just think that's the groove that I work to. But the other person, actually, he died just as Clayville was screened as Seamus Heaney, and his last words to his wife that he texted her were "Nolly to Mary," which is "Do not be afraid." And I met Seamus Heaney once. I had the great fortune to meet him and shake his hand. And I don't know whether I've ever told you this, James. When I met Seamus Heaney, I shook his hand and I met him, and he held my hand with both of his hands, and he shook it and he shook it and he shook it, and all the time he was shaking my hand, he was smiling at his big red face, was smiling at me, and he was looking straight at me, and so he touched me in that moment, and it was like almost like that kind of encouraging me to go off and do what I've got to do. So those kind of words, "Nolly to Mary," and that memory of that really eternal handshake are the things that I've just, don't be afraid. If you get it wrong, you get it right next time.
Wonderful. And is there like a daily ritual that you do, or some kind of habit that you have that you think contributes to you living the kind of creative life and doing the creative work that you do?
I think this is the point where I out myself as a Buddhist. Yes, I am a Buddhist. I've been a Buddhist since I was 19, so that's quite a long time. And I chant in the morning, and at night I chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, member of the Soka Gakkai. And it just it's a connecting thing. I feel like I'm connecting with something, with the universe, with something it's bigger and better than me. I feel like I'm revealing, what's good about me, what I've got to offer, and it's that whole thing about, kind of, I think I kind of mentioned it before, this kind of idea of kind of feeling as if you're at the beginning. I always, when I wake up in the morning, I go and do that, and I just feel as if I'm beginning again.
So in Buddhism, they say about, the end is not the goal, and not becoming too attached to the end goal that you have. So you've got this big project just now, the PhD project on Gilbertson's filmmaking. How do you ensure that you don't lose sight of things? And because I would imagine in a PhD is a pretty all-encompassing thing. You're having to take in huge amounts of information. You're having to absorb that information. You're having to kind of make sense of it as well. How do you ensure that you do keep that beginning mind and that freshness, even if you're 3/4 of the way through what is, I'm sure, going to be a pretty arduous piece of work?
Actually, only a few months into it rather than 3/4 of the way through. Well, I'm fully funded and fully supported by the Scottish Graduate School for Arts and Humanities. So I've got 3 years of funding and support. So that kind of means I have to really basically do it within that time scale. I also have a time to, because I'm going to the Arctic for so long, I have to have done so much and get to the point and raise the funds to get. I've got to have done so much this year so that next year I can go to the Arctic. So I have to have a level of understanding before I go to the Arctic. So I've kind of broken it all down. I've got a fantastic supervisor, Sarah Neely at Stirling University, and Ross Burrell at Glasgow School of Art. They are there to help me to be able to break off the bits of it, achieve, and kind of get through all the things I need to do to be able to create the piece of work that I'm going to create. So I actually have everything I need to be able to move forward, and I've got a very clear idea. There's also the whole issue of Jenny Gilbertson's daughters are still alive, and they have been fantastically supportive to me. I mean, they just keep coming up with inspiration and things and stories but they are well, one of them's not quite 80, but they are elderly. I would like to get this done and be able to show it to them and to their grandchildren within the next few years. The PhD has allowed me to do that. So
wonderful. And you mentioned having to kind of upskill and learn new technologies and everything as well. Do you have an online resource or a tool or an app like an Evernote, for example, that you love and you enjoy using?
Well, actually, I love Twitter. I like being able just to speak to the world, although there's obviously only just a few people that are actually following me. But I quite like that kind of expression. It kind of, especially when you're concentrating on things and you can feel as if your life is quite small. Just that idea of expression, I like that. I get loads of fantastic reading. I've met some quite really interesting people through Twitter, so I like Twitter. In terms of other stuff, I do use Evernote. All these things are quite useful to me. I love Duolingo. I mean, I speak Italian pretty badly, but I do love a language. I'm actually starting now to learn Inuit, so I can speak to the Inuit when I go there.
Is there a Duolingo version of that?
There isn't, but there is an online resource that offers they offer video lessons, so that's useful. That's the online resources.
That's your tool.
The smartphone resources that I use.
And you mentioned Jerry Rafferty earlier. If you could recommend just one record and one book to our listeners, what would they be?
Well, actually, I've mentioned Jenny Rafferty. He's got the shout out. I think actually I would mention one of my favourite songs is "Oh Superman" by Laurie Anderson, because it's just so absolutely inventive, and I just love the repetition in it. I love Laurie Anderson. She has a big idea, and she has big ideas, and she makes connections. I love that. In terms of a book, I think a book, Cosmic Comics by Italo Calvino. It's another big idea. It's about big ideas. It's about scientific fact, put that in inverted commas, or some of them have been disproven, but it's about he kind of looks at scientific discoveries and he writes wonderful little stories around them. It's a kind of book that you turn to when you need to expand your thinking and expand your universe.
Wonderful. And we'll put these on the show notes below, so people with jamestaylor.me. Just type in Shona Main and you'll be able to get the links for all these as well. So final question for you, Shona. Let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So you have the tools of your trade and the knowledge and skills that you've acquired over the years doing it, but you have no contacts, no one knows who you are. You have to restart. How would you restart?
Well, I don't think I would do anything huge. I think I would just find somebody that I found interesting, and probably somebody older, somebody who had an interesting way of being, an interesting way of looking at the world, and I would just, spend time with them, hopefully film them, or not, maybe just write about them or record their voice. I would just be with them and just hear what they had to do. But actually, I would probably just try and find something that fascinated me and then be fascinated by it.
Well, Shona, thank you so much for coming on the show today. What's the best way for listeners to connect with you, to learn more about the work you're doing, and hopefully come and see the documentaries that you're going to be making?
Well, they can connect to me on Twitter, or they can look at my blog, which is shonamain.com. I mean, really, if you Google me, you'll find me.
Great. We'll put all those links here on the show notes as well, so on Twitter and your blog as well. Shona, thank you so much for coming on today. I wish you all the best with learning to speak in Inuit, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the work that you come up with at the end of the PhD you're doing as well. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, James.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.